Good evening, everybody. It is so great to see you, and so many of you decked out in your red for Valentine's Day, so good work on costuming. My name is Jen Summers, and I am thrilled to welcome you to our first dance talk of 2023. We have, of course, I wish you a happy Valentine's Day. And we didn't really, but our first dance talk of 2023 did fall on Valentine's Day, and it is about one of the greatest love stories of all time, so it kind of worked out beautifully, even though it wasn't intentional. Before we get started, just a reminder to silence your noise-making devices, which, yep, I had to do that. And if you need to leave, come in and out during the talk, you are welcome to do so. We just ask that you use the doors on either side of the seating behind you. I am thrilled with the panel that I have assembled for you today. When Stanton and I were talking about this dance talk, sure, it would be easy to talk about Romeo and Juliet. And in fact, when we did this premiere back in, premiered this ballet in 2015, Connor and Karina were here to talk about creating those characters. But obviously this ballet, like our company, is so well known for all the men's roles. And we just really couldn't resist the temptation to pull three of our most well-loved and accomplished dancers for you to hear from tonight, which is, I know, why we have such a beautifully packed house. I am sitting next to Chris Coomer, and I should say, all three of these gentlemen, I'm director of the academy, and I must say they all came from the school, which is wonderful, and I'm very proud of that. So Chris, and when I was writing this, I only realized just now that you two came into the company the same year. And Jessica too, from this, yeah. So they're what do you call them? Classmates, yes, thank you, that's the word. So Chris and Connor joined the company from the school in 2004. Chris was promoted to soloist in 2007 and first soloist in 2018. In the 2015 production of Romeo and Juliet, he originated the role of Tybalt, Juliet's uncle, and he will be reprising that role. And he has also recently stepped into a different role at the company, functioning as one of the ballet masters as well. So he works to set ballets, and maybe part of this one, yes, part of this one, on the company and coach them as well. So dual role for Chris Coomer. So welcome to Chris. And then Connor is our Fondren Foundation principal dancer who also joined the company from the school in 2004. He was promoted to soloist in 2006 and principal in 2007. He was our original Romeo, and he's going to reprise that role this year with his Juliet, Karina Gonzalez. So welcome to Connor. And then a more recent Academy grad. I feel like you're kind of far from us. I don't know. It's Chandler Dalton, who joined the company from the school in 2016. He was promoted to demi-soloist in 2021, and then in 2022 to soloist. And then this may be news to you if you haven't heard it yet. Chandler was just, in December, right? Promoted to first soloist. Were you in the 2015 production as a school kid? You were not. Okay. The following year you performed. We did take Romeo to Australia the year after the premiere and had a long run of very successful performances there. But then this is actually the first time since then that we've brought Romeo back, thanks to our friend COVID. And we're really excited. This is an extraordinary panel. And we are gonna start, because we need to start on Valentine's Day with a love story. And then we're going to get to some other things as well. Okay, Connor, I'm going to start with you. What is it like coming back to Romeo opposite your original Juliet, Karina, after 8 years? What's new? How are you approaching it differently? What new discoveries are the two of you making? What has your relationship as Romeo and Juliet shifted at all, or your relationship as Romeo with the other characters shifted?
Hi, everybody. Well, Karina and I keep joking that some of the wrinkles are new compared to how we're looking at the video. But no, it's amazing to me that it's been 8 years. It feels so recent. I guess that's for everybody, right? The past 5 years has just sort of been a time warp. And it feels like we've performed this ballet so much, actually. And I think part of that's how deep and thoughtful the process was, how much time we spent on this, and how many shows we did of this in Australia. We really, we did it over 10 shows, which is, we just back to back to back to back. So it really felt like this ballet had more of a life than it has. So there's a lot of excitement and surprise coming back to it, that it is as new as it is. The company has changed a lot. 8 years is a lot. So there's a lot of new faces and a lot of new relationships that are developing amongst the cast, which is really fun for us. And for me, getting back to a love story with Karina is what a joy. You know, Karina and I have danced for years together and made many ballets with Stanton together. So it's a really freeing experience for us to get to work together, where there's such familiarity and such trust. That each other's internal rhythm, and I know what her instincts are, and she knows what mine will be. So you just get to kind of release yourself, which is a real joy as a performer. So that freedom, particularly in a story that you need to release your heart as much as you do, is a dream. To kind of be at that place in our careers, both with each other and individually, that we are hopefully leaving it all out there on the stage together.
And Chandler, I didn't intend to ask you this necessarily, but listening to Connor, and you're coming into Romeo for the first time, how are you going about establishing that kind of connection with your Juliet, which I believe is Monica?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I remember seeing the process being developed when you had done it in 2015, because I was in the academy. I think I just saw like the tail end of it because I think it had started the year before, but I guess I've danced like a couple times with Monica, and the partnering is very, very difficult. And I think the biggest part of sort of developing our chemistry together was how we like worked together to sort of like figure out how to do all these like lifts and partnering. And then once we sort of like felt more comfortable with that, then I think just working with the ballet masters on how we can connect more in the sort of in-between moments when we're not like, when she's not above my head or I'm like spinning around, like I think definitely the growth was mostly in the process of like learning together and growing in that way.
So it's almost like sorry, Connor, you're developing the foundational trust of your relationship is the physicality, and then you move on from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't envy Chandler's position because this dance is, or this ballet is so hard. Some of the partnering is so challenging. And Karina and I have spent so many hours trying to take away the stress of all of the difficult lifts. So much of your process is just execution, let alone getting to that place where you are leaving your heart out there. And that just comes over time. There's nothing, you can't buy time, right? So it's just doing it again and again and again and again to that place that you're not stressed and you're not thinking, you can just execute. And I spent months and months in this process where Chandler is now, so I know how hard this ballet is, and look forward to seeing them on the end of it.
And how many pas? There's a lot, right? I mean,
I feel like there's like 4.
yeah.
Yeah,
Four or
I'd say there's
five.
4 big ones, and typical Stanton, there's always something in there that is going to take you at least, 30 minutes of every hour rehearsal. Just one step that is so, exciting and exhilarating, but that is time consuming because it's so challenging. Whether it's, sort of like a figure skater toss where you throw her up and she spins around twice, or just a simple half flip, but the balance is so delicate.
Yeah.
that
The rhythm between the partnerships is so important.
And do you get an opportunity to watch Connor and Karina do you, and when you watch them run through it, do you pick up anything?
Oh, I mean, for sure. I think like just watching how easy it is for them, I'm like, maybe I'm overthinking it a little bit. Like, I don't know if this should feel as hard as it is, but I think definitely like watching them, having seen them do it so many times, and even having rehearsals with them in the very beginning, like it was very helpful to have him there to be like, just so you know, like if you put your hand like this, it'll make it much easier. And I think those like little tips help so much with like developing the partnering and the mechanics of these like very, very difficult lifts.
And it's so nice to watch somebody, I mean, it's also challenging, but to watch everybody who performed it last time, we were all in the same process. So Jared Matthews, I think, and Ian Cassidy were the other Romeos. So we kind of all learned it and collaborated on developing this role. Chandler's getting to come at this with fresh eyes. And so I see him making some different choices, and I'm like, oh, is he making that because he doesn't like my choice? Or, you know, and I love that, though. It's healthy for me to see somebody absorb what we were doing in a new way, as opposed to we were all concerned before about doing it the same way. And, you know, ballet just sort of, artists will begin to interpret it in their own way. So it's nice to see fresh eyes on it and fresh choices that will challenge me to think about my own choices. As Karina and I are doing a lot, looking at the video of ourselves, which is very difficult for any dancer to watch themselves. We use video a lot in the rehearsals. And to watch yourself is painful at times, but we learn a lot. And we learn a lot about what new choices we want to make, or what we never felt like we got the way we wanted to, and we picking up where we left off.
So, Chris, what about your love story with Lady Capulet? I mean, I wonder a little bit. I mean, it's very clear what her position is, but what about, you know, coming back to that role with Jessica? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Actually, in Stanton's version, he was very specific about how he didn't want that relationship. So we tried to kind of not do anything too obvious about it in this production, just because of his choice not to. From what he said, I believe that in the actual play they don't specifically talk about it. So in his mind, it wasn't happening. But I just think it's more family rather than love in this one. It's like, you know, I see myself as like the next heir to the family. I mean, Lady Capulet only have a daughter, and back in those days, everything was passed down through the male line. So I see myself as their son, basically. So I think it's more a relationship of mother-son, like really close that way in this version, rather than lovers. Which is why at the end you will see her go through that same emotion, that same loss, that same kind of.
But through the eyes of a mother.
But through the eyes of slightly different take.
Yeah. Well, and you're in a different place as a family person than you were in 2015. Does it feel different? I mean, you're in a different point of your career too.
It always feels different coming back to stuff, you know. And like Hannah was saying, like, you know, this time I get to be kind of sitting back a little bit, so I get to see other people doing the same roles, kind of new people that are taking what I say and kind of going in slightly different directions with it, which is, I mean, it's always great. That's why we always say, you know, you should come to see every cast, because every cast interprets it slightly different. It's always one story, but you can play it slightly different depending on how you connect to it, how you relate to it, and all that. So it's been interesting having to. I mean, because we always have an inner monologue, you know, when we're miming the stuff about what we're trying to say, what we're trying to get across to the audience, with certain moves, but having to, like, verbalize that, like, to somebody and having to explain, like, this is why I did this, and in here, you know, like,
This is as you're coaching somebody else in Tybalt.
Yeah, as I'm coaching someone else. So it's little things I pick up of myself. Like, you know, I purposely held the sword away because I didn't want to be, you know, combative at this point, or I did this because of that, and so it's been very different this time. And also just having to coach other people. It's not just about me and my role. It's also about all these other roles and how I see them and how I've interpreted them. And
I as Chris or I as Tybalt?
I as Chris, yes. They are the same at the moment. Yeah. I was going to say I'd like to see a lot of Capulet supporters out there too. Yeah.
It's true. More people came Capulet today. Well, let's talk a little bit about Romeo's arc. I mean, you know, we sit in the audience and we see in 3 hours like a huge arc in their love story. And I want, you know, and like Chris said, it's all nonverbal. he starts in love with Rosalind and then sees Juliet. Sort of, can you? And Chris was mentioning like an inner monologue. Can you sort of take us, Chandler and Connor, through how? Because I mean, I've never been in a relationship that moved 3 hours fast like that. How do you really propel it in such a way that's so believable? Because this is not fairy tale. It's real people and just, yeah.
Well, for me, in this production particularly, he is in the clouds. His head he is that, that emoji of the heart with wings, just constantly floating around. Even more so than other productions. And I just think there's sort of a naivety to him in this, that his idea of love is in almost so simplistic, so idealistic. It's such an idea that he doesn't even think about what he's experiencing. It's just purely driven by this desire for love, this constant, this production, he's constantly reading poetry. He's constantly studying this thought of love, so it's more like something he almost manufactures. In my sense, with Rosalind, it's until it's something with Juliet, then it's reciprocated in a way. Maybe somebody else's head and heart is as lofty as his. So I think it's not until he really goes through the story with Juliet do those feelings become, in my opinion, of course, more honest, more true. But prior to that, I feel like it's an idea. It's an idea that he is pursuing, that he's dreaming of. And then as this story unfolds, this idea becomes his reality, which of course is a dream come true for him.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think he's sort of like in love with the idea of being in love, especially with Rosalind. And like you said, it's like feels a little bit more manufactured. And then I feel like he sees Juliet and he's like, oh my gosh, this is actually like a different feeling. Maybe this is like the actual love that like I want or that I've been searching for. And then I think just throughout that, he just makes very, I don't want to say impulsive decisions, but I mean.
Absolutely, absolutely does. I mean, he goes from Rosalind to Juliet, like,
yeah.
I mean, in 1 second he's giving, this idea, he's leaving Rosalind this rose, and his life depends on it. He can't even hang out with his friends, can't exist in the market scene because he just can't think of anything other than Rosalind. And then he sees Juliet. It is literally, and then that rose is for somebody else immediately. That's the youthfulness of it, right? That's to me, the naivety. That's the beauty of it. He doesn't know anything else, right? He's never experienced anything like that.
Do you think it surprises him that she likes him back? I mean, that Juliet is as, that's it. I'll leave it there.
I feel like he's like kind of just blinded by the like thought of like he's in love, and then it's like, I don't know, like one connection in a way. Like, I don't know if it's like surprise, but I just feel like he's just going with it. Like, wow, I love this. This is like exactly what I've been dreaming all day about, and it's finally happening.
Stanton, I think, in a couple of moments is really good about the sense of touch in the beginning when they first meet, that all of a sudden they're dancing with each other and they're like wildly, but then all of a sudden when it's like a conscious choice, that the idea of touch to them is so powerful and so meaningful, but then they can dance without even thinking about it because it's still not quite real, but making a conscious choice to hold somebody's hand is very real. So there's a lot of beautiful moments layered in there, and also they kiss like teenagers. I mean, they're just constantly kissing in this production, which, I think is accurate. When a teenager has their first kiss, they could kiss for 10 hours straight, like it's until their lips fall off. I do think there is authenticity within that. Of a 16-year-old child or kid kissing for the first time, it's magic. I mean, you don't understand why, you don't know what's happening, but and that exists and of course develops, but it is still, they are still so young, and you can see how their experience. It's not, or at least we're trying to not make it look like a 30-year-old guy kissing a girl. It's trying to make it look like this kid is kissing somebody for the first time. Before it's just words that were in his book, and now it's something real.
It's like better than he could have imagined. Yeah, yeah. So I think I forgot to say this in my introduction of Chandler, but he's doing both Romeo and Mercutio. So he's having to, play different parts. And we have the beautiful costumes out. In many ballet productions, you see really just the two colors, the blue and the red, the blue for the Montagues and the red for the Capulets. But Stanton has really, and his designer, Roberta Guidi de Bagno, has really elevated the family of Aeschylus, the house of Aeschylus. So Prince Aeschylus we always know about, but what I don't even think I really got until I saw this in 2015 is that Mercutio and Paris are from that family. So you'll see, depending on what night you come, you'll see Chandler in blue as Romeo or in a more of the gold palette as Mercutio. He's not as much of a dreamy lover. He's more just into ladies for a different reason. How would you, in contrast to Romeo, how would you sort of describe Mercutio's, like how you embody Mercutio in the ballet?
I feel like Mercutio is very, very different than Romeo. He just wants to have a good time with anybody and honestly everybody, and he wants to be drinking, he wants everybody else to be drinking, he is the life of the party, but I also feel like he's sort of, because he's a part of this house of Aeschylus, and it's like above Montague and Capulet, he's taking advantage of his sort of power, like that he's about to inherit, and it's just like, hey, I'm Mercutio, like, come here, like, you want to have a drink or something? And so, like, I feel like he's really, I maybe a little full of himself, whereas like Romeo's sort of like in love, and he's just like, let's just have a good time. Like, that's all I want. So.
And then how would you describe, or maybe both of you, like his relationship to Romeo?
I feel like he's trying to like kind of be like, hey, like this is where the fun is. This is like how you're supposed to live your life, like carefree, just do whatever you want. But I think Romeo just doesn't want any of that. He's just not into that at all.
In some other productions, the relationship between Mercutio and Romeo is a bit more developed, and in this one we really bring out Benvolio and another character, Balthazar, and so there's a couple other characters. So it creates a little bit more contrast between those guys, who are sort of like the party guys, a little more living life to their fullest, to the max, to Romeo, whose head's in the cloud. Mercutio is always drunk in this production, and Romeo's always sort of drunk on love. That there's this sort of real contrast there. And where all the guys, all of his friends are constantly teasing him, constantly poking at Romeo. Oh, you're romantic, this idea, get over it. But some of the younger characters, Balthazar, who is supposed to be slightly younger of the lot, is kind of sort of interested in Romeo's idea of love. Hey, will you tell me about it? And he wants to hear the stories, but until Mercutio walks in the room, and then it's like, nothing, coolest guy. Everybody just, idolizes Mercutio, and that sort of, he always steals the spotlight when he's in the room.
Except with Tybalt.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about the Mercutio-Tybalt relationship.
It's a tough one, because you have to think of it like we were saying. The House of Aeschylus is up here. They basically rule the city, run it, everything, and we're further down. So I feel like Tybalt's always just frustrated, because he's obviously sided with the Montagues. He's friends with the Montagues, hangs out with the Montagues, sees Tybalt as a bully. So I just feel like every time in this production, he's always wanted to pick a fight. He always wanted to test himself, because he is the better swordsman. He's brought up, a lot better, had a lot better teachers and stuff like that. I'm more of a street brawler. So
Mercutio's a better swordsman.
Yes, Mercutio is a better swordsman, which is why it's so shocking that Tybalt actually kills him, that he is the actual better swordsman. So I feel like he's always, wanting to test himself, and, like you said, because he is kind of big-headed and kind of full of himself, and he's from the House of Aeschylus, so he knows, even if we get into it, there's nothing I can really do about it. I can't kill him, because it's going to ruin everything. You know, my cousin is getting married into their family, so this is a big opportunity for us too. If I ruin this, I could technically destroy our house, you know, back in those days. So it's like I just feel like I'm always trying to avoid confrontation. That never usually kind of works out. He's always trying to pick a fight with me, which is why we get the inevitable battle with the accidental death. Yeah.
I was going to say, in Stanton, in this production, Stanton always tries to say, okay, here's the two families, and it's not just about these two families. He always tries to bring a broader context into how to view these two families, and he does that with the House of Aeschylus, as Chris was mentioning, that, you know, Juliet should be getting married to Paris and to keep the peace. So there is this sort of politics happening within this production that you don't see it as clearly. You sort of see Paris as this wealthy, beautiful man, but you don't see it as how that interacts with the feud between the two families. So there's scenes in the ballroom where Aeschylus is like, okay, prove to me you can keep the peace, to Tybalt and to the Capulets. Prove that you can behave to make this wedding go along. Just that sort of the real moment for me when that family is kind of elevated within the narrative of how everything sort of ties together.
I mean, just piggybacking sort of off of what Chris said, like, I think Mercutio really gets a lot of joy out of, like, seeing Tybalt get more and more frustrated until he just pushes him to the point of him killing him. So I think because Mercutio is just, like, all about having fun, all about this, he sees this guy that's just, like, always trying to pick fights, always trying to prove himself, and he's like, come on, man, like, what are you doing? Like, yeah.
Mercutio is untouchable, right? So that allows him freedom to behave in a way that, particularly to poor Tybalt here.
And I feel like he doesn't also fully understand why other people don't act the same way, maybe. Like, that's why he's trying to get, like, Romeo and Benvolio and Balthazar, especially because he's friends with them, to be like, hey, you can do this. Like, why aren't you? But I don't think he fully realizes, like, he has so much power that they don't have.
Stanton actually mentioned something the other day, he said something about, not necessarily with Mercutio, but with Paris too, that after Tybalt's death, like, Paris literally goes there and is like, okay, so is this still happening? And he said that it's very telling for that character, the fact that, like, there's this big loss in their family and all he really cares about is this marriage still on. And I think that's a big thing for kind of Mercutio too, is that kind of, I don't think he gets that side of it because he is, you know, he hangs out in the taverns with the poorer folk, like lesser houses, you know. I don't think he really cares or is interested in the politics of it, and that's why he doesn't recognize what's happening with his own actions, what they're leading to, and all that. So yeah, he just feels like he can do whatever he wants.
Sounds like an impulsive teenager.
Mm-hmm.
Got a lot of those around here. So we've talked about love, we've talked about conflict a little bit, and I sort of wondered about, particularly for the Romeos, you said you have 4 pas de deux, and then you have to go between these lush romantic things into battle, and then back out, and I wondered, sort of that transition for you, what that feels like to go between the love for Juliet into rage. Yeah. Back to love again, I guess.
Yeah, in this production, and it's something, Romeo sort of misses out on some of the fun dance scenes with Mercutio and Balthazar, Benvolio in this one. But as much as I'm jealous to not be in all the fun market scenes where they're brawling all the time, it does give Romeo this incredible arc that he's sort of anti-violent, right? He's against violence. He's not interested in this sword fighting until Mercutio's death, until something is too close to home, and that's sort of tips him over the edge. So his decision to brawl is compulsive. It is purely from the heart, which is perfectly along with Romeo's character. As in many other productions, he's doing all the sword fights and all the market scenes, and he's constantly there. But this one, Romeo is entirely driven by every decision by his heart, and I think that's a really...
Including that one, right? I mean, ultimately it's his heart that leads him to avenge the death.
Mercutio's death, exactly. So I sort of, as a character, it makes perfect sense. You're constantly avoiding fighting throughout this entire production. You're more interested in chasing love, but then there's a real breaking point that is one of my favorite parts, is building up to the fight scene of Tybalt, the music, the tension, and everybody's trying to stop you because Romeo's not a fighter. There's no way he should do this or would win this fight in a normal situation. So I love that moment as far as an arc for the character.
Just overcome with emotion.
Absolutely. I mean, we just, as you will eventually see, when we get to do this, the Tybalt and Romeo fight, the Romeos are just throwing ourselves at Tybalt, and poor guy is trying to fight with this correct sword technique, and we're just throwing ourselves at him because because some stories, things happen to you on stage, and it feels real, and you don't feel like you have to create the feelings inside. It feels truly honest. The ballet is doing the work for you. Other ballets, you have to walk out of the wing and present this idea. You have to do a lot of the work off stage. And in that moment, everything that's happening around you creates all the necessary emotions for you in that scene, in that moment. So I really love that bit.
I think this is a good transition because there is real sword fighting. And so Chris is very experienced with sword fighting, and you're doing a lot of the staging of those scenes, is that right? So I asked him if he would take Connor and Chandler through and show all of us some of the basics of sword fight. I mean, that's not the right word. Sword play that they have to do in the production. And I mean, just to uplift what Connor said, that if you are so full with emotion, how are you sure that people are staying safe, I guess,
Rehearsal. Simply, I keep telling all the guys, I'm like, it's just, especially the Tybalt Romeo fight, like when you see it, it's like, I remember telling Connor, like I watched it the first time, I was like, I get goosebumps, because I'm like, I forget how intense that fight is. And it's so fast, and it's one of those ones that like, you have to know it in and out. Like if you take one fraction of a second to think about which the next hit is, where it is, you've lost it. And then there's no building back up to that. So it's just, yeah, it's especially that one. It's so fast and so intense. You have to have it in your body. It's got to be ingrained in there. And it's one of the fun things coming back. Actually, we had our first rehearsal, and I was telling the guys, I felt his sword fights are like doing a part of it. Like it's not about just whacking the sword. It's like it's really about like, where is your block? Where am I blocking? Am I doing it in a way that it doesn't look like I'm attacking? I have to keep it close to me, and then attacking, I have to do it right here. I'm attacking your arm here, I'm attacking your leg, I'm attacking your head. Like you have to be very specific in how you do it. And it's not just that. You'll see like, you're circling around each other, you're moving backwards and forwards across the stage. So a lot of it, like I always say about Parda, it's like it's footwork. You've got to know that person, like know their movements, what they're gonna do, and how big their steps are.
So the pas de deux is both with your sword and with your combatant, the person you're
because you have to maintain different, like certain distances. If you get slightly too far away, you'll miss the sword. If you get two on top of each other, then it's hard. You can't keep up with the speed. So it really is like a kind of pas de deux on its own. So yeah, it's fun.
So let's do it.
Cool. All right. So I'll get my sword, because one thing you'll notice is all three of these swords are slightly different. So we have our Capulet sword, a slightly different pommel, red on it. Aeschylus sword, obviously a lot fancier. Aeschylus, all right? And then we have our Montague sword, our blue one, which has a slightly different one. So, for this, okay, so we're talking about block. I'm going to put this down. Hopefully you can still hear me. Okay, so they always say, I just trained in what we've taught here, and I'm just martial arts enthusiast, I guess. So we always say that when you draw...
And Chandler told me last night that he's also has fenced in his past.
So I did a little bit of competitive fencing. My first competition, I faced a lefty, and I'd never done that before. So I lost. He won, and I was so discouraged I never did it again.
I was going to apologize in advance if there was anyone who actually knows fencing, because the techniques we use are not at all fencing, but I had no idea there was one right next to me.
I think Ellie too. we draw a sword, our first block is 1. So blocking a leg, I always do this. Do whatever you want me to decide on, my martial arts. Do 1, 2, 3, 4, and then on 5. So we have 5 different blocks. Once again, 5 different hits. Arm, leg, head. So we have 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. So there are 5 positions basically we have to work with. And it's just about coming up with different patterns or different variations of hits that kind of just make it more interesting. And one good thing about Stanton's is that it's actually very musical. So you notice that we do like 4 slow hits, 3, 4, 2 more, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's very musical. And I feel like the sound of the sword plus the music on top, it just really kind of, it just builds and make it even better.
So it's set though, right? I mean, okay. So you have these basic positions, and that's how you introduce it to the dancers. And then there is a particular pattern that they have, just like steps.
So the way I wrote it down is I have to take it from one person's point of view. So there's always 2 people fighting, right? If I take mine from one person's point of view and I just write what body part they're hitting. So you do right arm, right leg, left leg. And if I tell that to one person, the other person has to block the same parts. So it's easier doing that. And it's all about, I always think, coming from patterns. So there's different patterns that we do. So there's like a back and forth. So we do old school nutcracker. So there's a lot of little things in here. So bent nutcracker, we go head, leg, arm. Very basic. That's a back and forth one. Easy to remember. So during that, I'm just like, nutcracker, everybody. Okay. Another good one is around the body. So how I see it, I go head, leg, head. So you're making an arc around the body. And once again, that's me just attacking and him defending. So what you'll find is it's not just about the blades, it's about how we use our bodies too. So a lot of it is how we show our intention of whether we're attacking or defending. So if once again I do around the body, Connor's defending the whole time. So he will stay back, whereas I stay forwards. If we do our nutcracker.
Is that choreographic, Chris, or like is that a? I mean, I don't know anything about sword fighting, so I mean, and maybe Chandler, you have to chime in. But I mean, do you? I mean, if you were in a real duel, would you be doing that, or is it like that leaning forward and back is to help us understand?
I think mainly the idea of our theatrical sword fighting is that we're showing intention. Yeah. That we're not just, there's a lot of sword fighting and a lot of ballets where we just do this in the middle. And they just do that, right? That a lot of Macmillan, wonderful Romeo and Juliet, but not the best sword fighting because it's a lot of things in the middle as opposed to we're trying to create dynamics that I'm going to, Chris is going to come at me, I'm going to go for his leg, he's going to come at me, so that we're trying to show who's making the move, who's defending and who's attacking. And then that can create dynamics within the scene that where Tybalt clearly has an advantage and Romeo falls over, and the only reason Romeo survives is because somebody gets in between the fight or something like that. But it's really just to show who's attacking, who's defending, so that somebody at some point has an upper hand, or that it looks real, that there's a sense of an element of urgency and realism.
Also, I just realized this right a second. When I do it with Connor, I naturally stand a bit further away. So we have this big reach while we're doing it, which gives a lot of distance. But it also is because the fight that we have, like we were saying, is very emotional. So it's very body heavy while we're doing it, which shows that, I don't know, that emotion and everything. But when I do it with other people.
So what would it be a difference with you and Mercutio? Like, what's a Mercutio moment?
Okay, so you'll find that Mercutio, so let's just do all 1, 2, 3. So, like I said earlier, I don't want to fight it. Okay, so you'll notice I come in and I'm trying to avoid it, and every time I do it, I'm always back. So even if I'm attacking, I won't go as far for it, because my intent is not to kill it. My intent is not to attack him, I don't want to. So a lot of times it's me just trying to defuse the situation and having to defend myself in a different way. So you'll notice the body positions really dictate the intent of this. Yeah, which I just realized when I do it with Connor, it's a lot more aggressive and bigger because that's in my body. of how I do that with it, which is slightly different than when I do it with Chandler, because I don't want to fight. You know, he's the house of Escalus. All right. So I wanted to show you just a little bit of the Romeo fight, beginning at Chandler. Sorry. So this is one of my favorite fights. Okay, so we actually start across the stage and we have to sprint to each other. So the first thing we do is just come right at each other. 1, 2, 4, 5. That's it for now. Yeah, I don't want to spoil it. In real life, really go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it is a lot faster, it's a lot more intense. I just don't want to spoil it for you. I'll give a little sneak peek of what it's going to be. All right?
So much, yeah. It is so athletic and exciting too, regardless of whether it's like, I mean, you do have, I mean, it's real sword positions though, right? I mean, those are like, sort of.
I mean, one of the main differences is, can we get up just real quick, is that between a real thing is, if I'm going to swing at Chris's, I'm going to swing to his right thigh. Sorry, sir. If I'm going to swing to his right thigh, if Chris forgets the choreography, I'm not going to hit him, because I am aiming for a diagonal at his thigh. Same with his arm, I'm aiming beyond his arm. And so I can always trust Chris. We fought so much together that even if we mess up, I know that sword's not coming at my face, because the extension of the elbow, wrist, release the sword on an angle. So that's what we're trying to create, the illusion that I'm going all the way to him, but instead I'm going just beyond him. And it's Chris's responsibility to create the block, to then create the hit. Also, he's so good that I don't even have to know the choreography, which I often, sometimes in that character I forget, but he shows me with his eyes where he's going. So he's always half a step ahead. He shows me exactly what's going, so I can truly just respond to him, which I can't do with everybody. Sorry, get excited about this sword.
Yeah, I'm sort of wondering about
Turn into kids.
the original, the early stages of the rehearsal process, because it's probably pretty intense, and there's a lot of Romeos and a lot of Mercutios and a lot of Tybalts who know each other in different ways. I mean, I guess, like you said, you just have to start slow.
It's just a matter of repetition. Like, we're still, especially the Romeo fight, just because that one is so intense, long, and just fast. It's like we're still building. Like, I feel like we're pretty much there, but we've done it so many times that it just, I remember getting back in, I was like, this is still in my body. Like, as we step around each other, you see, like, we maintain certain distance. I know how he moves. He knows how I'm gonna move. So just like I said, it's like a part of that. Like, it's like going back to a girl I've partnered my whole life. You know, just instinct, muscle memory.
How do you feel about it, Chandler? Because you're newer to it.
Well, I remember the first rehearsal, I think we only did like 2/8 of steps, because I was like, I have not sword fought in like, since the last time we did it in Australia. I had like this long of a fight, but I just, as we had more and more rehearsals, then learning sword choreography became much easier, because there was like the different patterns that show up in different fights. But I just remember the first day we made it like maybe 2/8 into the Romeo and Tybalt fight, and I was like, how am I gonna learn all of these fights? I have no idea. But repetition, and then also feeling comfortable with your partner, is very, very important.
You switch around at all? Like, would you swap Tybalts?
I feel like sometimes in the very beginning of the process we would, and I mean, it feels completely different. It feels like partnering somebody else completely different.
I mean, everybody puts different energy into their sword. So ideally, I'm making contact with the sword, but I'm not having to fight the sword, because I'm trying to create a position for him, my partner, to hit. But if that, also your wrist gets surprisingly tired with these metal swords, but you're trying to create the sound so that it's musical, but you're not trying to literally knock the sword out of somebody's hand. And the adrenaline of it definitely gets people to a place that sometimes you have to be like, okay. bring it down a little bit. And a lot of that, as Chris keeps referencing, is about, he says it's like partnering, because a lot of it's about distance. So Chris and I fight very far away, particularly in the Romeo fight, because it's lunging with no skill. I'm just trying to throw myself at him. But if you get too close, the points of the blades get very close. So your understanding how somebody moves around the stage is also very important. So when we're in a tech rehearsal, we often, or actually in the performances, we leave time before the show, 5 minutes pre-curtain, clear the stage. Anyone can walk through the sword fights, get the spacing and all of that. Because it is the distance between the two people is one of the most important things.
All right, before I turn it over to the audience, do you each want to give us sort of a moment either that we should look out for when we go see it, or your favorite, your gem that you want to highlight?
I'd definitely say Romeo and Tybalt fight. It's amazing, but I mean, there's so many good moments in this ballet. It's like up there with Swan Lake. Like, I mean, the music, sword fighting, it has everything in it. Like, yeah. But the Romeo and Tybalt fight's killer.
I mean, the sword fighting. I can't say anything else. I mean, everything, the whole ballet is great, and the patadas are very beautiful. The balcony patada, I feel like in particular, is a very beautiful and standout moment. But whenever I see sword fighting, I get so excited. I'm like a little kid when it comes to sword fighting. So the sword fighting.
Don't tell Karina, but no, I just take the moment to say, as Jen mentioned before, Chris and I have been working together since we were kids. We lived together in the dormitory, and we've been in the school together. So I'm particularly looking forward to sharing this time with Chris as he's transitioning and working with us in a different capacity. Because the experience of a dancer is very unique. You're like family, you're so close to each other. But to get to be on the stage with each other is a really unique experience. And these sword fights that we made were super collaborative with Stanton. It was one of the more collaborative experiences I've had with him. Because he's usually very prepared prior to coming into the studio. In this one, he was very open, so we were very involved. So I really look forward to sharing this moment with a friend and colleague for over many years. It'll be special.
Well, that's a beautiful way to end. So. Yeah. I always say to the students, even the youngest ones, ballet friends are forever friends. And I think because of all the things, the intimacy that you have, whether you're students or working on a patada together or sword fighting together or just standing in the same place at the bar year in, year out.
I was going to say, we live together. Even if we don't live together anymore, we're here all day, every day. So we live together. So.
Chris sees me more than he sees his children, unfortunately, so.
All right, we have some time for a few questions. So if anybody, and just since we haven't done this in a while, just remember that it's good for me to be able to repeat your question because the acoustics in here, sometimes people can't hear you. I did see a hand go up. Yeah.
When you were young students, like elementary, maybe middle school, were you dreaming of being Romeo?
So the question is, when you were younger,
That you wanted?
when you were young students, or did you have the goal, the desire to be Romeo?
My dream actually was always to be Mercutio. I just thought it looked like so much fun. I also wanted to be Romeo, but Mercutio, I was like, oh, that's one of my dream roles. So to get to be able to do it is so exciting for me.
When you're young, you just want the big tricks and the turns and the leaps. And so when I was, elementary school, that's what caught a young Connor's eye. She was like, wow, all this stuff. But I do remember the great video, I'm sure many of you have seen it, it's called ABT Now, and it was just the balcony patada of Kenneth McMillan's, Julio Boca and Alessandra Ferri, and I that was one of the VHSs I wore out watching as a kid. So absolutely, because it was one of the first exposures to an emotional side of dance that I hadn't quite seen so much of. It's so abandoned, so free that to watch somebody just dancing through the flowy white, iconic white T-shirt that he wears in that balcony scene. There's just a freedom to it that so many of the other ballets seem so contained. So absolutely, it's a score I think we all dream of dancing to. Once you get familiar with it, Prokofiev is, enough said, right?
It's the most beautiful score in ballet, I think.
Do you have advice for audiences to prepare to watch this performance?
Do you have advice for audiences to prepare to watch the performance?
Go to the bathroom beforehand. I mean, the ballet speaks for itself. I mean, everyone knows the story, and yeah, just enjoy it.
I think Stanton's a great storyteller, so fortunately, I think in this production, it's a story we're all very familiar with. I always think it's great to read the Cliff Notes or something prior to, read the program, because the people putting some good work into that stuff. But my main advice to audience members is always don't worry about what you don't get. Just absorb whatever you do get, And I think it's not a problem at all if Chris and I go see the same story ballet and we thought it was a different story. You know what I mean? I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. As long as I got something out of that story, that's perfect. That's all that matters, as long as I get something. So for me, it's destigmatizing this idea that we have to know everything and we have to understand exactly what's happening on stage. It's just let it wash over you and take what you can take. So that's always my kind of advice to particularly newer ballet members is don't worry about what you don't get. Just get something,
How many other people are still from the year that you started in 2004? Just the two of you and one more?
So the question is, who's still in the company from the graduating class of 2004, or even who was in the company before you joined? That's still around.
One more still in the company that was here when we started, and one other person that joined with us who was in the academy with us.
Which is Jessica Collado, who's pretty good. She's pretty good.
You come back in 2 weeks, she'll be sitting in this chair talking about Summer and Smoke. So.
But she's beautiful and Lady Capulet in Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
Have you ever had an accident on stage while sword fighting?
Have you ever had an accident on stage while sword fighting?
I actually got my finger broken in Australia. One of the guys accidentally nicked the tip of my finger in one of the sword fights, and I couldn't bend the tip to hold my sword properly for the rest of the trip.
It wasn't me.
I wasn't.
Sometimes the swords break, and that's a problem. Another reason you try not to hit too hard because the metal is breakable. So swords have broken. Fortunately, not in a too important moment for us, but that happens. But yeah, things like that. Every once in a while, somebody will, a pretend stab, or it'll definitely some holes through T-shirts. Even you're trying to stab next to somebody, and it goes through their costume instead of
Hopefully not.
So far, so good.
So far, so good.
For those of us who are old enough to remember, there was a 1969 film, Romeo and Juliet, made in England. Does that offer any insights for your project today?
So he's referencing a 1969 film of Romeo and Juliet. Do you watch things other than ballet to prepare for a story ballet like this?
I remember, I didn't watch that one, but I watched the Leonardo DiCaprio one. It's just so different, I feel like, than actual Romeo and Juliet, because they don't have swords, they use guns instead. But
I love Mercutio's death in that. The speech that he does is amazing.
yeah, it's a really good movie, but other than that, I haven't really. I watch maybe other versions or other interpretations of the character from other versions, such as Macmillan or John Cranko's version. But I think I get a lot out of just watching other people who are doing this version, like watching Connor or watching anybody else who does the role. I feel like you can learn so much just by watching. And so I feel like constantly in the studio I'm watching, seeing what choices they make, seeing would that feel right for me? it looks great on them, but I don't like just trying to sort of pick ideas from multiple casts, multiple different people's interpretations, and using it to form my own idea of what I feel the character is.
In the early stage, when we were making this, everyone was buried in Romeo and Juliet, whether reading it or watching movies, and because you didn't know what Stanton was going to ask of you. You know, when you're walking into a choreographer and you're telling a story about it, you need to come with something. Sometimes they tell you exactly how they want it, they want everything, and other times there's space for you to bring things. So in that process, there was a ton of research. We even had a professor come and speak with us, and we did a Q&A so we could all talk about our characters with her and ask any questions, interpretive questions. And but I mean, ultimately the thing is you have to work with what you've got. You know, we don't have Shakespeare's words to work with. You know, there's only so much space at certain times. So you, as Chandler's saying, eventually a dancer, their most valuable tool is their eye, because you have to work with the material given to you, and you try and get as much inspiration as possible. But the choreography tells you what to do, hopefully.
Yeah, and I feel like there was one rehearsal I remember in particular. It's working with Ian, and it was the bedroom pas de deux, and it's when he's going to check the light to see that it has become sunrise, and he doesn't want to leave. And I asked Ian, I was like, I don't really know what I'm saying here. And he was like, well, let's look at the dialogue. And so he read the dialogue, and I can't remember the exact line, but I was just like, wow, Shakespeare is a genius. Like, he is incredible. And I think knowing some of that dialogue really helped me be like, okay, now I understand what I'm trying to say. And I don't say it out loud or physically, but I do it with my body or my face or whatever. And I think just knowing a little bit of the dialogue helped me so much in that moment know what I was trying to say or portray to the audience.
It's when you don't have steps, actually, is when you need that dialogue the most, right? That moment, I mean, it's a beautiful moment. You're just rolling out of bed and walking and opening curtains and standing there, and it's this beautiful image, but you have to be finding something within yourself. Another great one is like Juliet at the top of the balcony scene, right? I mean, she could just recite Juliet's words there because she's just standing and looking at the sky. And so you need something. When you have steps, the steps and the music tell you where to go. When you don't have steps, which is often, you need something else.
We have time for one or two more questions. Yeah.
When y'all started in ballet, did you have any idea that you would be doing so much acting? I've been impressed by this company, the level of acting that comes through in the ballet.
So the question is, when you started in ballet, did you have any idea how much acting you would be doing?
No. No. But I will say, in a lot of these talks I've done over the past 2 decades, whenever we talk with the academy, that's one thing I always stress with them. Just because you join the ballet company doesn't mean you're going to just do ballet. Like, it's amazing how many different things. I've sang on stage, I've done tap on stage, sword fighting on stage, you know, flying on stage for Peter Pan. It's like, people think, oh, ballet company, ballet. But there's so much more to it, acting. Like, I actually had one of a student come up to me the other day. I think they're going to some other summer program, and they were like, yeah, we don't do partnering because she's younger. She's like, but we do flamenco dancing. She's like, it's weird. I've never done it before. And I was like, do it. I was like, throw yourself into it. I was like, do it. I was like, you never know when you're gonna get to use that. I mean, even in the academy, we do character dancing and all of that sort of stuff. So, no, not when I was younger, but I always stress it nowadays. Yeah, you have to be able to do everything, even in a ballet company.
It's funny, when you start dancing, actually, you kind of, one of the first things they teach you to do is like smile. You know, it's like you are teaching kids to engage theatrically more than you are. Here's fifth position. Here's your passe. Here's your technique. And then at some point, technique becomes really important, and you kind of forget that. I mean, when I was in my young teens, I went to a very serious school, or some very serious schools, and I had no idea why I was studying ballet. I liked it before at my mother's school, and we just put on shows, and they were theatrical, they were all sorts of things. It wasn't until I came here, and then I saw the company work, and as a young kid, then you're like, oh, that's why we're doing all this technique stuff, because the technique is so important. It is integral for a dancer to be successful, and it takes too many hours a day just to get there. So there is a period of time when you're younger, you kind of forget that you are actually part of a theater company. You know, like we are entertainers. We're not just pirouetters, or you know, or double tour. You know, it's. So I think at some point, for us, for me, it's high school when I came here, watching a dance like Christopher Bruce's Ghost Dances, or being exposed to works like that for the first time, that we said, oh, this is what it's all about. This is what we're doing it for.
Yeah, I feel like for me it was like the acting part of it was the thing that sort of drew me to it, because my grandfather was an actor in like movies and theater, but I was always very self-conscious of speaking in front of people. Not as much anymore, but at the time, I think the fact that I was able to sort of express or act, but I didn't have to say anything, was very appealing to me. And I mean, it's one of my favorite things to do sometimes, just like those moments that we were talking about, just walking on stage and opening a curtain feel the most special to me, as opposed to landing 10 pirouettes. Like, I just think the acting part of it was what was like, yeah, I wanna do this. This is like, sign me up.
Okay. We have come to the end of our time. I know that you enjoyed these panelists, so please let them know. We do have 3 casts, right? 3 casts. So if you are so inclined, it's always amazing to come back and see the same choreography danced by different performers, because they, just as we heard tonight, they each approach it a different way. So we encourage you to do that. We will be back here, as I said, in 2 weeks with Kathy Marston, who is the choreographer for our most recent world premiere, which is Summer and Smoke, which is based on the Tennessee Williams play of the same name. And she'll be joined by her dramaturg, which is, I think, a first for Houston Ballet. We already have a dramaturg. And then Jessica Collado and Chase O'Connell, who will be dancing the leads in that. So we hope to see you back in a couple of weeks. And thank you so much, and happy Valentine's Day.